Hi everyone. So what we're going to do today is turn to the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. This week we're going to talk about freedom of speech, and next week we're going to talk about freedom of religion, both of which are covered in the First Amendment. So what the First Amendment says is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that beginning part, that's going to be about freedom of religion next week. And then the First Amendment continues, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So all of that second part is going to be about freedom of speech broadly. But as you see, it says freedom of speech, it says freedom of press, it says right to peaceably assemble, and it says petition the government for a redress of grievances. So there's different things going on in there. Now, you'll note that the Constitution says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, which you might think would mean that Congress can't make any law abridging your freedom of speech, but that's not what happens. What ends up happening is like what we talked about in due process and equal protection, where Congress and the states can make laws that end up taking away your freedom of speech as long as they have a good enough reason, okay? And what's going to qualify as a good enough reason is something that we're going to talk about when we go through the videos. So Congress can make laws abridging your freedom of speech if there's good enough reasons. And also, as we'll get through, if the way that they're abridging your freedom of speech is sort of small enough and matches enough with the reason, but we'll get into that in the next videos. Some things to know is that there are certain types of speech that are just not covered by the First Amendment. We're going to go through these in the cases, but if you have this type of speech, then the First Amendment doesn't apply to you at all, and then the government can abridge that speech much easier, okay? So some things that the First Amendment doesn't apply to at all is obscenity. So if something is obscene, then it gets no First Amendment protection, which is different than sexual or sexy. And we're not going to go into the cases on it, but just know that obscenity isn't covered by the First Amendment at all. So a government can just not let you say something if it's obscene, and there's a whole test for that, again, that we're not getting into. The second thing that's categorically excluded from the First Amendment is child pornography. Regular pornography isn't necessarily obscene, so non-obscene pornography of adults is protected by the First Amendment, but child pornography, even if it isn't obscene, is never protected. You have no First Amendment right to make or share child pornography. Then the third thing that is completely accepted from freedom of speech is something called true threats. We're going to talk about that in the next videos. If something's a true threat, then you're not protected by the Constitution. The next thing that is not protected by the Constitution is fighting words. We're also going to get into that in the next videos. If what you're doing is fighting words, it's not protected by the First Amendment. And then the last thing that isn't protected by the First Amendment is if you're inciting violence. But the test for incitement to violence includes more than just inciting violence. We're going to also get to that in the next videos. But so altogether, there's 5 things that just are not protected under the First Amendment when you're talking about speech. And again, number 1 is obscenity, not protected by the First Amendment. Number 2 is child pornography, not protected by the First Amendment. Number 3, true threats. Number 4, fighting words. And number 5, incitement to violence. But if what you're doing is none of these 5 things, then the First Amendment covers you. Again, the government could still possibly stop your speech, even if it's outside these 5 things, if the government has a good enough reason, and if the way that they're infringing on your speech is related enough to that reason. And we're going to go through those standards next. And that is your introduction to freedom of speech and the U.S. Constitution. A few other things to think about that we're not going to have time to get into these videos is, why do we have freedom of speech, okay? And I want you to think about this, and depending on why you think we have freedom of speech, you're going to come out different ways on these cases about whether or not you think it might be protected. Now, a really big idea when the Constitution was ratified and when people were drafting this was this idea of marketplace of ideas. And it was John Stuart Mill. And he said that freedom of speech leads to the truth. Because like a regular marketplace, if there's different people competing with different prices, you're going to get the fair, true price. And speech is like that. That if you protect speech robustly, then you're going to have unregulated ideas, unregulated thoughts. You're going to have all this discussion, and then the truth is going to rise up, okay? And false ideas will fall to the side. And as long as you let that process go on its own, people are going to correct mistakes. The truth is going to come out. And so you want to have freedom of speech, because if you try to suppress wrong views, then you're not going to end up having this unregulated economy in the truth. There's obviously a really strong critique of that in today's society, and that, minority viewpoints don't get out, that this isn't really a free market, that there's going to be dominant players whose ideas get heard more. A lot of people say that if you look about, conspiracy theories or right-wing things in the United States, and especially with President Trump's manner of, speaking and tweeting and things like that, it's not entirely clear whether what rises is the truth and everybody ends up believing the truth, or how that goes. Anyway, so that's one main reason that we'd have freedom of speech, this marketplace of ideas, where if you have unregulated ideas, the truth comes out. Then the second idea is that we need freedom of speech because we're a democracy and a self-government. And unlike a king making decisions, if we're going to be able to rule ourselves, people need to say their opinions, okay? You need to say your viewpoints, you need to say what's going on, so that we can all make informed decisions, because since it's a democracy, we need to make informed decisions. You need to know competing ideas. You need to know if you're going to vote for something on the left, what people on the right are saying, so you can make up your opinions. And then the third sort of main reason why we might have freedom of speech is an idea just about individual autonomy and self-fulfillment, okay? So the first two ideas we talked about are to protect democracy. The marketplace of ideas is good because the truth comes out and we have a better society. The idea that we need this for democracy is good because it helps us make good democratic decisions. This third idea of individual autonomy and self-fulfillment is about the importance of free expression to people. In order to be yourself, in order to be, a human, you need to be able to speak freely, and you have to say what you think and, your opinions, and trying to stop your opinions from coming out as, like a 1984 George Orwell style, infringement. And this country, which was meant to be free people who pursue happiness and liberty and justice and all of that, we should be able to say what's on our minds without the government arresting us for saying what's on our minds. Not necessarily because what we're saying is true, and not necessarily because what we're saying will help truth come out, or not because it's good for democracy, but just free people get to speak what you're thinking. So those are sort of the main ways that you might think we should protect freedom of speech in this country. And the next videos are going to focus on the cases.